Welcome to the Dark Zone at Adventure Racing Podcast. This is your host, Brian Gatens. We love and support USARA's The Checkpoint Podcast, and we're happy to play our role in sharing it with our listeners. This episode is an interesting one as Brent Freedland actually interviews me about my entry into expedition racing and what advice and guidance I can offer. So thank you to Brent and The Checkpoint for inviting me to come onto the show. I enjoyed talking about it. Even found myself getting a little emotional right there at the end, as I do love expedition racing and adventure racing so much. So thanks for being here. Thanks for being a listener. And if you like what you hear, head over to The Checkpoint and like, click, and subscribe there. You keep racing, and all of us will keep talking. Enjoy.
Oh, it's a checkpoint.
Checkpoint. You better figure something out.
Right, there's the checkpoint.
I think we made a mistake at the last checkpoint.
Coming to the checkpoint, sir.
Calling at the next checkpoint. Over.
All right, summer adventure racing season is here, and we are back with another conversation on The Checkpoint, a collaboration between USARA and the Dark Zone and Adventure Racing podcast. We're keeping things in-house today. I will be joined by Brian Gatens, the mastermind behind the Dark Zone and editor of this podcast. We're going to be talking about expedition racing, and more specifically, how one goes about jumping into the deep end and actually taking the step to level up to multi-day expedition adventure racing. For those of you that are thinking about it, this will be a great conversation that I hope gives you some information to help you, get to the start line of your first big race. If you haven't really thought about it, maybe something in here will grab you and inspire you to think about it. You know, anything is possible in this sport. And for most of us, I think the thought of doing an expedition race seemed crazy before we did it. So you're in good company. And maybe for those of you that have actually done one or two races, there's still something in here for you. You know, maybe there's still some information that helps you think about how to make things a little bit easier as you navigate this crazy sport that is adventure racing and specifically multi-day racing. I think it's a good time for the conversation. Endless Mountains either is about to happen or has just happened, depending on when we drop this podcast. A month or so ago, our friends at Bend Racing put on yet another tremendous Expedition Oregon, America's toughest race out in the Pacific Northwest. And the World Championship of Adventure Racing, ARWS's World Championship, is taking place up north in Canada in just a few months. So a lot of talk about expedition racing within the community. Hopefully you can learn something here. And as always, if you've got ideas or topics or questions that you would like us to tackle on The Checkpoint, please reach out. You can send us a note via the info@usara.com email address, or find another creative way to get a message over to us. And we would be happy to consider your requests and think about those as we plan future episodes of The Checkpoint. Thanks for listening as always, and have a wonderful start to your summer. All right. Today we have a special guest that really needs no introductions. He's the editor of this podcast and a host of his own. Brian Gatens, welcome to The Checkpoint.
Thanks for having me. It's a sort of a surreal kind of a thing that I'm actually the person not doing the interviewing, and it's The Checkpoint, but I'm delighted to be here, delighted to participate in this USARA sponsored podcast, and I'm glad to bring some value to your show today.
Did you ever get called up by the OG AR podcaster Randy Erickson for an interview, or is this your first time on this side of it?
So I've been on TA1, which, by the way, everybody should go find and listen to. Yeah. 2 times. I'm a 2-time guest on TA1. So this is not my first podcast interview, but I will admit to the audience out there that I'm a little nervous being on this side of the microphone. Not going to lie to you.
Well, good thing I don't have to work very hard today. So Brian, today we are going to talk about expedition racing and really specifically how one gets into expedition racing. I've heard from a number of people that this is a topic they would love to hear people reflect on. And, the reality is there are not a lot of active adventure racers who do expedition races, right? Like most racers aren't actually taking that leap and most don't really have a desire to. So, in thinking about who I wanted to talk to here, I really wanted to talk to somebody that could bring kind of useful insight to the conversation from having relatively recently begun their quest on expedition racing. So I'm curious, first question, when did you know about expedition racing before you got involved in adventure racing, or was it the other way around?
It was the other way around. So my first adventure race was, I'm going to say 12 or 13 years ago. It was The Longest Day by Naira. Basically, I had like a lot of people who come into the sport. I'd done my fair share of endurance sports, right? Just go down the list: bicycle racing, Ironman, marathons, ultra running, all of that. And eventually, you begin to run out of runway with those sports, right? And not that I was bored, but I was looking for new stuff. And it's become a trope now inside our sport. But like I stumbled across Eco Challenge, and I was like, oh, what's this thing called adventure racing? And then I Googled Adventure Racing New York. And I was referred to the New York Adventure Racing Association. I sent an email to them cold. Denise Mast, who got back to me, said, listen, if you want to race, there's a guy who needs a teammate. His name is Dan Brandon. And we have a 30-hour race in about a month if you want to go do it. And that's what I did. It sounds crazy now looking back on it, but I emailed with this guy, Dan. Dan was on board to take me as a teammate. I met him like that evening. We stayed in a motel room. And the next day we're racing The Longest Day up in Bel Air Mountain. And the rest is history. Nothing like it. Meeting some stranger, crashing in a cheap hotel room with them, and then running around for 30 hours in the woods. Like anything else, Brent, right? It's a sport. It's a sport that sounds great. And Denise was so inviting. I went to that race and I had an absolute blast. I loved how adventure racing connected all of those dots for me. Dan's a great teammate. He's a great friend of mine today. I would race with him anywhere. And that's how I got into the sport. And then what happened was, once you get into the sport, you start racing more and more and more. You start hearing about other types of races. And I began to hear whispers of expedition racing. And then all of a sudden, then I was down the path and here we are. Yeah. But you mentioned, though, that so you were familiar with Eco Challenge before you started racing, yes? Yes. Yeah. Okay. So was there ever a thought, watching Eco Challenge for you, this is something I want to do someday? No. Or... No, yeah. No. I remember thinking that was something that was well beyond my capacity. That to me, those people were superhuman. And the Eco Challenge that I remember watching was the one in Morocco with the camels in the beginning. And I think that's the gateway for a lot of people. I mean, I remember the camels in the beginning, that team from New York that, is doomed. Like they're interviewing them and I'm like, these people are doomed. Yeah. And then, throwing off the camel and then the team's trying to bring the boats ashore. And I remember thinking to myself, like, this is, I will never do this. This is far beyond my capacity. So the idea of expedition adventure racing was not in my head for a very long time. Yeah. Yeah. It's funny. I mean, I remember watching Eco Challenge growing up, and I actually think I started watching it with I guess it's not technically the original, but the British Columbia one, which was the first full-blown Eco Challenge, at least in terms of the ones they filmed. There was technically one or two before that, but they hadn't figured out the TV piece. But, I remember in Australia watching, Eastwind carrying immobile teammate over a mountain and then running down a road with her for hours and thinking... Yeah, because she recovered, because the altitude was so bad, and they just carried her down the mountain and off they go. Yeah, it's just like, wow, people are carrying each other over mountains, and they've got this shot of them like bouldering up a mountain and falling. Like she's on someone's back and they fall backwards down this like boulder field. It's just wild stuff. And, they of course like to play it all up. So, I remember they'd start off each season or each episode with the like, this is the equivalent of 50 marathons or whatever they would do. Right. And same thing as you, I just thought this is absolutely insane, really inspiring, but I just cannot imagine how a human being's capable of that. Like what changes that all of a sudden it's like, I can never do that. All of a sudden I'm on the side of a mountain in the Faroe Islands. Like what happens? What do you think? Like what do you think changes? Well, like anything else, so my love of adventure racing, and I when I call it a love, I'm not being hyperbolic. I really love this sport. I think that something special happens inside adventure races that for a lot of us is not replicated anywhere else in our life. And I think that it fills a gap for a lot of us. And I think we love the teamwork and the camaraderie and the community. And for me, I kept coming back to adventure racing because I kept enjoying myself and I kept getting to know people. And I had these very, very close relationships that I was building both with teammates and then also seeing people in races. We're not a very large community, right? And so I'd see people around, hey, how are you? How are you? If we made those connections. And then what would happen was, and like anything else, you begin to check off boxes of race distances, right? You do a 16-hour race, a 24-hour race, a 30-hour race. And then all of a sudden, the gateway for me was Grant Killian's Untamed New England. That it was a 4-day race. It was in Maine. It was in 2018. And here's where it really was very, very smart. That first thing, it was a race relatively local to us. We live in New Jersey. My teammate and I, 2-person, only had to get to Maine, so it was relatively close. I'm not going like to Asia. And that race organization assigned us mentors. And the mentors, if you do remember, it was you and Abby. You and Abby were the mentors for Jim and I for that first race. And so here we had something that was close, that felt scary but achievable. We had mentorship along the way with people we trusted. And we didn't know if we would finish, but we knew that we could try. And that all of the supports were in place along the way that were going to give us our best shot of doing well in that race. And that really what it was. It was that gateway to, like, if I lived in Arizona or if I lived in Wyoming, I may not have gotten to adventure racing. I was blessed that Grant put this race on our backyard. On top of the fact, legendary race director.
Yeah, that all makes good sense. Yeah. And I mean, going back to something you said earlier, not to steer away from Grant, and you're absolutely right about that event. And it's so much easier when there's a race that you can just hop in a car and drive to, which is not the case for most people with expedition racing. But I, unlike you, I started with a 6-hour race. So you dove into the deep end, right? But even the 6-hour distance to me felt like the deep end.
And it is for the rest of the world. It is like if you do a 6-hour race and you go to work on Monday morning and you're in the break room, what'd you do on Saturday, Brent? I did the 6-hour race. You're like you did what? Like, I ran a 5K. Not to take away from the 5K runners out there, but the distances are so markedly different.
Right. Totally. Yeah. And, I remember distinctly signing up for that 6-hour race and being terrified, right? Like really scared about what I was doing. And then kind of got through the 6-hour race and, hit the finish line. I was like, oh, that wasn't actually so bad. And then a couple races later, I signed up for my first 12-hour race, and exact same experience, right? Like pure sheer terror to start that event. And by the end of it, a feeling of, wow, that was not actually as bad as I thought it was. And that just kind of continued for me up until that point where I took on the expedition. So, I really did the slow build. I'm actually a fan of the slow build. And it's not that I don't support people going all out, whether it's 30 hours or even an expedition race for your first race. But I think you enjoy the event more when you have that experience to lean on when things get harder. And obviously the bigger the race, the harder the moments that you really would benefit from that experience for.
Well, if you think about it, I got lucky with that first race, right? Because first things first, I didn't choose a 30-hour race out of any desire to a 30-hour race. I chose that race because that was the next race and it wasn't that far from my house.
Right.
It could have been a 6. It could have been, I probably wouldn't have raced, all those huge numbers, right? But I got into that race and I got in having no idea what I was doing. But I had a great team that I connected with right away. We had really good weather. We had a great accessible course, right? So all of those things were all kind of checked off for me. If I had a crummy, rainy night and if I had a bad teammate or bad nav, I might not have come back to the race. I was very fortunate in that. And it was hard. Don't get me wrong. It was really hard. But fate really shined upon me to imprint you never forget your first race. Had that first race go so well. It was like fate wanted me to enjoy it. And as we say, the rest is history.
This year's Maine Summer Adventure Race is moving off the Maine coast and into the woods and mountains. Based out of the iconic Sunday River ski area, host site to the 2018 Untamed New England Expedition Race, racers can sign up for 3, 8, or 24 hours of summer New England adventure. Expect a few big climbs, some moving water in canoes this year, not sea kayaks, and some great mountain biking trails. Directing races since 2016, Kate and Cliff White and their team from Strong Machine Adventure Racing regularly put together one of the best events on the East Coast with a modified Rogaine format perfect for all levels. While the July 12th weekend is coming up soon, there's still time to put together your team, join the fun, and take a summer shot at qualifying for the USARA National Championship in Bentonville, Arkansas.
All right, so let's go back to Untamed New England. So that was your first multi-day race. When you decided to take that on, like, what were your kind of initial thoughts when it came to kind of goal setting? Did you have any, or was it really more just like, we're just going to start this race and see what happens?
Yeah, so I raced with Jim Murnan, my race partner, my best friend, right? I've known the guy over 30 years, right? We're at each other's weddings. And him and I have never shied away from a challenge, whatever it is, right? We've done the Ironman together. We've raced bicycles together. We've done marathons together. Just check it off, right? So in many ways, we didn't have set goals for this race. What we had was preparing for the race so that we would have the best possible experience, right? Including going through a mentorship model, including doing a lot of training, including, looking into like working on navigation, working on our logistics, all of those things. So I think probably the better way to describe the goal for the race question would be that we set goals for ourselves to be as well prepared as possible to start the race. And we'd let the race be what it would be, like whatever it was, however it was going to unfold, so be it. Because we were so blind about what was going to happen that we couldn't set goals because we didn't even know what we didn't know, right? And so the goal was just to go and show up at the start line and have the best possible time, which we did. We had a hard time, but we had a great time.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe accidentally really wise, right? Because I think that too often in our sport, folks that haven't really done it, whether it's at all or at the level that we're talking about, they kind of underestimate what they're getting themselves into, right? Both in terms of the courses that they're going to experience, but also just, being out on a course for 4, 5, 6, 7 days is just a different kind of experience that you can't prepare for and you can't excel at, in my opinion, until you've experienced it. And even once you've experienced it, like the best adventure racers, how often do they truly excel at these events? Not very often, right? So I think that was probably wise for you. So you mentioned, training, and you were in a mentorship program, and, I'm sure you did your homework. So what were some of the things that caught your eye? Like, what did you learn from each of those? Let's maybe start with mentorship. I certainly remember working with you. I'm curious, what information, what mentoring did we give you that felt valuable and meaningful?
So one of the best pieces of advice that you gave us, we had a way to laugh about it, was so Jimmy's an engineer, and engineers are very numbers based, right? That's just the guy builds stuff for a living, right? And he builds airports. I mean, he's the numbers have to add up. And I remember very early in our mentorship that Jimmy was doing per day calculations regarding calories, right? We need to have X amount of calories per hour, X amount of calories per day to race for this many days, and he floated the idea that, well, he could find all those calories in Cliff Bars. Right. And that if he just packed a ton of Cliff Bars, they would all add up to the calories he needed. And you were like, whoa. Like, you were waving your hands in there, being like, that's not how food works during an expedition race. Like, it's not, you're not just putting gas into a tank. Like, you have to have a variety of items. Right. But your reaction was very funny because you level set very, very quickly about the idea of nutrition. Right. And so from that perspective, that was huge. That was a very big thing you did for us, was that there are nutritional expectations for expedition races that far surpass 24-hour, 36-hour races. You really have to think about your food. And that was a big thing for us to figure out there.
Yeah, I mean that was we're talking 7 or 8 years ago now, and at that point I had been expedition racing for almost 10 years, basically 10 years, and here I am, and I'm still not really sure what the answer is to food.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah. I
know
think
it's not all Cliff Bars or all gels. That's
no,
not
I
going
think
to.
the my food thing is this, is that, and this is in the dark zone, this comes up all the time when I ask this question, is it's as much as possible, have it be real food.
Yeah.
Right. Eat actual food. Don't rely too strongly on Cliff Bars, gels, and goos. Have them handy for quick hits. And then later in the race, begin to rely more upon simple sugars. Just start eating like a kindergartner. Like put down those, because your body's burning through so much stuff that it's really not the time to do it. But I will tell you, a well-placed bin carrot or bin apple or banana is golden. Golden to have that. Yeah. So I think nutrition is specific to everybody. But for me, it's like as much real food as possible. Lean on the simple crummy stuff later on in the race, and don't really. And what I can't do is I couldn't live off those hard processed foods a lot. And another big thing too, I always tell people is be prepared to make yourself a camp meal. Get hot water, make a camp meal, seal it, put it in your bag, and eat it an hour into a trek.
Yeah. Where else did you look for kind of the academic intellectual learning, leading up to your first expedition race? How else did you go about trying to learn about it?
So I read a ton of race reports. Any race reports that came out, I would read about. I read as much stuff as I could find, and the internet is just filled with them. And I think that you're in my world, my version of race report are the dark zone interviews, right? I don't write race reports. I just don't. But when folks put out race reports, just go find them, read them, study them, go so far as to reach out to the racers and ask them questions about how it worked out. So I think you need to build a fundamental understanding of those logistics, and race reports are a great way to go. Consume as much media as you can about it. It's really kind of grown in the past several years with how everyone has a phone in their pocket with a camera and all of that. Really take a look at what people are putting out there. There's a lot of really good content out there for how to prepare for your expedition races.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a quick plug, not so much, from a self-aggrandizement perspective, but Abby and I, when we launched Endless Mountains, we wrote a kind of we call it the Expedition Playbook. So kind of an article series that's hosted on our website. And I think when you started, there wasn't something quite like that. But like you said, there's great race reports. Mark Latanzi, I know he hosts a database of race reports. I think that's a great observation too, between Randy's TA1 podcast and your Dark Zone podcast. There's lots of audio race reports. So a lot of information.
Ben Racing has theirs. Disability has their race rambles. There's a lot out there.
Yep. Exactly. So those are all, really great things. And just like I said at the beginning, there's actually not a lot of us that are doing multi-day races, and certainly not doing many of them. So, I'm sure that wherever you are racing, if you're listening to this, there's a handful of folks in your local race community who have quite a bit of knowledge about expedition racing, and everyone's always really happy to chat about it. I was really lucky when I started. My first expedition race was actually also Untamed New England. It was, I think, a decade before yours, was 2008. And, I would say I was fortunate in that I was racing with three kind of like veteran pros at the time: Bruce Wong, John Neely, who's still racing a bit, and Tracy Robertson. Bruce and Tracy are retired from adventure racing. But it was such a gift for me to be able to do my first race with three people that had raced Primal Quest several times. And, John had competed in like an Eco Challenge North American Championship. And so they had a lot of experience that they could share with me, which is not everybody's intro to the sport. But if you get that opportunity to race with a veteran, it's wonderful.
Oh, I absolutely encourage that too. Like if you're looking to level up, and I think it really applies to really any race where the expedition level at the highest part of it is reach out to a race director and ask about possible teammates. Listen, I'm fit, I'm strong, I want to do a race. Can you connect me? Because by happenstance, once again, back to Dan Brandon. Like I ended up racing with someone who's considered to be a master navigator, master racer, master great guy. That was the idea of imprinting, right? When a baby animal is born, the first thing it sees, it thinks it is. I was imprinted on Dan and his attitude and his approach, and we just had so much fun. I think that's the big thing I want to point out too. Like when it comes to Untamed New England and expedition racing, is I just finished reading The Explorer's Gene by Alex Hutchinson. Great book, great book. And they talk a lot in that book about the idea of play, how play is really, it's integral towards all species. And I think from a mindset perspective, when I looked at Untamed New England, to me, that was an advanced form of play. I was doing this adventure with my friend in the woods with people I liked. Like, I didn't make more out of it than it had to be. I wasn't going to hang my ego on it. I wasn't going to hang my self-worth on it. I was just going to go play and have as much fun as I could over these 4 days. And I think that mindset really kind of carried me well into the race.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. Okay. Did you learn anything else, whether it was from me and Abby or some other experienced racer that you talked to leading up to Untamed? Anything else that stuck with you?
So I learned something literally right before the race started that I thought was really important for me to see. We were turning in our bins. Remember, 50 pound was the bin limit, right? You had to stop at 50 pounds. Yeah. And Jim and I are in the parking lot of the university, and we were panic packing, right? We reached the stage of the preparation where we were freaking out a little bit. And I look across the way and I see Mark Latanzi standing next to his van with like his hands in his pockets. And he had a bike that was kind of disassembled. And I said to Mark, I said, like, Mark, I got to ask, like, we're racing like in like 18 hours. What's going on? He's like, yeah, this thing busted on my bike and I ordered a piece and it's supposed to be delivered. It'll get here eventually. And he was just so calm.
Yeah.
Like, he was just like, it's going to be the way it's going to be. The part's probably going to arrive. If it doesn't arrive, I'll figure it out. But when it does arrive, I'll put it on the bike and I'm good to go. And that same race, at that same time, if you remember, Val Nordquist was driving to the race and somebody rear-ended her on the highway and destroyed her bikes on the back of her car on the way to the race, on the way to a 4-day race where bikes are destroyed.
Right.
She shows up. She's like, I got to go find new bikes.
Yeah.
And the two of them were so cool about it. And I was like, so talk about like things you learn right away. Like, here are two very successful racers who have a great time. I just realized that, like, you just got to solve the next problem. Freaking out's not going to help you out over it. And I think in expedition racing, there's enough plate spinning that something's going to go wrong eventually. And so what's your reaction going to be like to that? So that was something I learned right before the race started. And by the way, Mark's piece arrived and the rest is history. But like, that's what we learned there.
What about training? Like, going back to that now, I want you to be honest here, right? We'll maybe talk a little bit more about what you might do today versus 7 or 8 years ago. But that first year, what did you do to prepare for your first expedition race?
So what Jim and I did was that we did our best in our training to replicate the experiences we thought that we were going to see on the course, right? And so what we would do, and this was, I think you might have given us this advice, on a Friday night after work, after everybody, our kids we weren't tucking them in, but they were younger. After the kids went to sleep, Jim and I would get on our bikes. I'd meet him at his house and we would pedal off into the night, like at 6 or 7 o'clock at night. And the plan was going to be, we're going to ride the entire night. We're going to get on our mountain bikes with our full gear. We're going to replicate a long overnight ride, and we would leave and we would be gone till dawn. We'd be gone for 12 hours and we would just ride up through the Hudson Valley. We'd ride through state parks and get back in the morning, go to the diner, get breakfast, but practice like having a really, really long overnight bike session. So stuff like that. We did a lot of trekking. We did a lot of getting our feet ready. If you remember, my feet were my enemy for a long time. And I'm like, they are not going to defeat me here. And so getting our socks set, getting our foot lube set, spending a lot of time on our feet. We did a lot of that. We did a lot of paddling. Basically, what we did was as often as we could, we layered in these really, really big experiences, trying to replicate race experiences, knowing that we weren't going to get there. Like we didn't have a 36-hour trek. But I'll share with you, a year later, getting ready for Iterra, one thing that Jim and I did was we did the Devil's Path, which is a really difficult trail in the Catskill Mountains. We did the full Devil's Path, which was super hard, one of the more dangerous hikes in the country. When that race ended, Jim's wife, Kate, met us with our mountain bikes, and we attempted to ride our mountain bikes the 130 miles back to our homes. So we spent all day on the Devil's Path and all night in our bikes. We got pretty close. We ended up bailing out at a McDonald's about 30 miles north of our house. And then Kate had to come and get us. But it was like another 100 miles.
So McDonald's is like the campfire. Don't go to the fire. Yeah. Don't go to the McDonald's. That's it.
Yeah. When I remember my bike, it was almost like the Death Star had the Millennium Falcon and the tractor beam. we were pulled into the McDonald's parking lot. We were not passing that McDonald's.
No, and a good lesson. It's not the first time I've mentioned it here, and you've talked about it on the Dark Zone plenty. But for people thinking about expedition racing, it is one of the most dangerous things is comfort, right?
Yep.
And
Yep.
at the same time, comfort can be wonderful, whether it's food or warmth or, God forbid, a bed. But you have to be really confident that you have the ability to walk away from it.
Yep. Yep. As Jonathan Neely calls it, pillow rock.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Stay away from pillow rock.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit. I hesitate to use the word barrier because you obviously did it, right? So I mean, nothing stopped you from signing up. And by the way, how many expedition races have you done now?
I was working on this before. So I did Untamed New England. I did Iterra twice. I went to Ecuador. I did Faroe Islands, and I raced. So Iterra's in Scotland, Faroe Islands, Ecuador, and I raced Ozark last year.
So 6. So you've done 6, we think.
Yeah.
About 6, yeah. So you've done 6 of these things now, right? What did you feel like were the biggest hurdles getting into expedition racing?
So obviously the biggest hurdle has nothing to do with capacity. I think that I've seen people. I think fitness is important. So let's check that box off. You need to be fit enough to do it. But I've seen people with fitness levels that they were not superhuman who had great experiences. They were strong and they were steady and they could go. And I think that very often a barrier for many people is they think, oh, I'm not fit enough to do that. I think barring any major injuries you're having, any major challenges physically, anybody can get fit enough to do an expedition race. I want to say that for everybody. So that really wasn't a barrier. I think for me, what always got in the way for me was I would have to back into it based on scheduling. I'm a soon to be retired school administrator. And so I was good for July and August. Right. And if it was in July and August, I was good to do it, but I couldn't go race in October. I couldn't go race in March. I only did Ozark last year because it fell in our spring break. Right. So for me, very often time was a barrier for that. I was very fortunate too that my expedition races were my vacations. Right. So we'd have a family vacation every year that was relatively local that we do every single year. And then I would use my vacation capital, my vacation time to go do races. Right. So I would save up for that and I would go and I would do that. So I really didn't have any huge barriers that way. Nothing really stood in my way. Any barriers I had were kind of self-inflicted.
Yeah. What about gear? Did you feel like you were well equipped from a gear perspective to start multi-day racing?
Yeah, you kind of build into that, right? You got to get a bike box. You have to learn how to break your bike down. I think a lot of the gear that I needed, and walk me back if you think I'm wrong, Brent, but I found that the majority of the gear I needed for a 5-day race, I would have for a 1-day race. Yeah. Like you had to carry a sole bivy. You had to carry, a puffy jacket. You had to carry rain pants. So in reality, the amount of gear that you would leave for a 5-day race really wasn't any more than you have for a 24-hour race. But to that point, I think the amount of the bins and the packing, that was really hard. The story I tell is Untamed New England, and this was a lesson learned for me. I didn't read the schematic close enough. This was new to me, right? And I didn't take it as seriously as I should. I talked about it previously, and I read the schematic, and I thought I kind of understood it, and I thought my food strategy will let's put a lot of food in a lot of different boxes, and I'll call it a day. And we got to that first TA, and the food that I thought that I was going to have access to for that big paddle, I didn't have access to. I was without food. Now my teammate, because he knows me well enough, he packed extra food because he knew it I was screwed up. So he gave me some extra food and we were good to go. But I think a big thing for me that if you want to talk about barrier was my lack of attentiveness to understanding the schematic. And I will tell anybody, if you're getting into expedition level adventure racing and they put out a schematic, read it 50 times over and sit with your teammates and talk about it and make diagrams and what goes where, because that's another discipline to get that right. Because if you screw that up, you're stuck without gear.
I think that's awesome advice. I mean, I think that we take for granted, right? We think about the biking and the trekking and the paddling, and then sometimes you add in these extra skills. You got to make sure you know how to rappel or whitewater paddle. Mm-hmm. But in a way, like the most important skill for an expedition race is organization, right? Because it is such a nuanced journey you are going to go on.
Hmm.
And if you're not thinking properly about food and gear and where you're going to pack things, like you said, or even like, okay, you've got all this stuff you're going to have to carry on this really big leg. Like, is your pack well suited to
Right.
actually carry all of that gear for 24, 36,
Hmm.
maybe 48 hours, right?
Right.
Those are
Hmm.
big things that are often overlooked early on in your career.
Well, I always remember a great thing we did. We did this when we were in the Faroe Islands. I raced with Jim and Shelley Johannesson and Dave Ashley. That when we went over the schematic and went over the bins, we actually kind of simulated the race. Like the bike shoes have to go into this bag here, and the helmet goes here, and we would talk these things through because it was not uncommon for, like, you would start on a trek and you'd be getting your bike, but you wouldn't necessarily, do you bring your bike shoes, not bring your bike shoes, or do you would do with like your PFD? Do we bring the paddle gear? There is that. And this is part of the sport. This isn't a burden. It's part of the sport. Is you have to be able to manage your gear and your logistics effectively. And talking about it out loud with a teammate was really important to do, right? Because it was only saying it out loud that you learned how to do it.
The Never Summer Adventure Race is back with a 6 and 24-hour event the weekend of July 12th in Eagle, Colorado. Katie Farrington and her team have been putting together the longest-running national championship qualifier in Colorado, and this marks Never Summer's 10th anniversary. Set in beautiful Eagle County, just down the road from Vail and Beaver Creek ski resorts, the course will send teams out on some of the most scenic stretches of river in the country, while also including epic mountain biking and trekking stages with views of the jagged Gore Range to the east, Flat Tops Wilderness to the west, and the Sawatch Range to the south. This year, Never Summer has been granted private property permissions, and so it offers an all-new and amazing course with places unraced in prior events. The course will be both linear and Rogaine formats, and there is nothing like the Rockies in the summer.
What about the actual, well, this I guess wouldn't be your first expedition race, but I guess the first race you would have flown to would have been Scotland, right?
Scott, yeah. And the reason why we chose Scotland was that back then it was run by ITARA, was run by James Thurlow, an outstanding reputation. And for the race directors out there, I got to tell you something. Your reputation drives registration. I don't care where you're having it. I don't care how beautiful it is. I don't care how many mountains you're going over or the things you want to brag about. Your reputation as a race director will absolutely carry you forward. And you see that with registrations, right? Some teams struggle, some races struggle for various reasons, some don't. I think that you need to value the race director reputation. And James had an amazing reputation. And it was also, and the logistics were relatively easy because we're on the East Coast of America. It was just flying over to Europe and going to the race.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. The one thing I would just add as a caveat, though, is I always, like, for myself, like, and I've been around the sport for a long time, I will still make sure I reach out to really experienced racers who I know have done a lot of races and ask them for feedback if I'm thinking about doing a race and I'm not personally familiar with the race director, because I think that the people that have done a lot of expedition racing, they really know which race directors are dialed in. They, can tell you both what the kind of local flavor to the race is, but also kind of tell you about the things that maybe the race director struggles with so that you have a clear sense. And look, we all struggle with something. None of us are perfect at what we do. But I think that, there's a lot of people, like we said at the beginning, there's a lot of people who can never or choose to never really travel to other races. And they only know the race director that they know, right? And sometimes they don't realize that, hey, there might be other options out there that actually are worth exploring. Not necessarily better, but different and maybe worth thinking about. So that just a caution there is,
I think also too is talking. Yes to that. Talking, getting sort of a reference on the race director. And one thing too that James did really help himself was he had really, really good post-race media that I could go watch videos of the races, and those were interest generating machines. Yeah, that he really spent a lot. And so I would go and I would watch Ireland, and I'd watch Wales, and I'd be like, these races are awesome. How could I not do this? That really pushed me to go to ITARA.
Yeah, and they were, and I think they still are. I know that he's passed the torch to someone else, but
Yeah,
okay,
Paul
we're getting
McGreal
into
has
the
it
weeds
now.
here.
Yeah. I'm going to put a plug for Paul McGreal. Paul McGreal has taken over, and Paul is a strong race director with Dirty Events.
Yeah.
High Terrace going back this summer. It's going to be a great race.
Yeah, no, I mean, it seems like they've really just kind of picked up and left off
Yep.
where James and
Yep.
Lisa
Yep.
and Lisa moved on. So that said, so your second race, I guess you needed to get on a plane. And for most people, if they're thinking about it, like, I mean, anecdotally, my sense is that for a lot of people, that's the barrier. And that's where a lot of people stop. Like, yeah, there's gear considerations. Of course, there's economic considerations. But what were your thoughts the first time you flew, and how did you kind of figure out how to go about that big Mensa puzzle of getting yourself to the start line? Because that's where things get challenging.
I mean, it's a traveling circus, right? I mean, you're bringing a bike box. Like, when we would travel to a race, it would be a dedicated bike box, right? So you have to break your bike down, pack it in, make sure pray it doesn't get broken, protect your derailleur, take a little bit of air out of your tires, hand it over. Like, you have to get it onto the plane, right? You have to hope they don't charge you extra money because you're putting it on the plane, right? Hopefully, depending on the desk personnel, sometimes they just wave you through, sometimes they charge you. So so when you go to the airport, you have to pack your bike box. You have to bring, when we flew to Scotland, it was full bike box. Everything hopefully stays in one piece, and 2 big duffel bags filled with all of our gear. So you were checking three big bags, and you were carrying a bag with you. And so logistically, just moving everything around was just it's a real pain to do all that, which, to your point, is a bit of a barrier because it's such a hassle getting all the gear there.
Yeah. Yeah. And, I think that is something that you can work hard to get better at. So, I mean, that was your first expedition race. I bet you carry a bit less now than you did when you started, right? But I've got it down to, with a few exceptions, if it's an incredibly gear intensive race, like there's pack rafting and you have to bring an ice axe and all that, maybe it's different. But I can usually do 1 bike box, 1 duffel, and a carry-on, right? Maybe 2
I agree with that. Yeah. The one thing we did, though, I would tell you for Faro and for Ecuador, I packed a lot of food.
Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. But it's that classic, right? It's the same thing with people who get into long distance backpacking. Like, the first time you do it, you pack your pack. If you have someone come in that knows what they're doing, they will strip out at least half of your weight, right? Like, you don't need this, you don't need this, you don't need this. And it's just, it is a challenge. Well, let's get a little granular here, for folks that want to reference this in the future. So let's talk about bikes. Because like you said, packing your bike can be daunting. I know plenty of experienced adventure racers who still will take advantage of someone else breaking down their bike and building it every time they get. What are your thoughts on the do's and don'ts of packing your bike for travel?
Yeah, so I think first off, I've packed my bike successfully for multiple races, right? So it's not a barrier. It's not that hard to do. You have to have a reasonable amount of mechanical understanding of your bike. You have to be able to, first things first, you have to be able to take off. Obviously, the wheels have to come off, right? So you take the wheels off. You have to make sure you protect your derailleur. You have to drop your seat, right? So your seat has to go down into the bike. And you have to, besides the pedals coming off, depending on the size of your bikes, I have seen some smaller bikes you could do this. My bikes are big because I'm kind of a big guy, so I remove the handlebars and I drop the handlebar down into the box itself. Yeah. But I got to a point, and trust me, I'm far from a mechanic, and I got to the point where I could break my bike down in like under 10 minutes. Yeah. A few things to do, and I think that's from a granular perspective, doing that, and also then. And then what I would do too is for the bike box, I would put a lot of my clothes in dry bags and put the dry bags in next to the bike for the purpose of creating padding for the bike. Yeah. So I would move some gear that way, and I would have that in there. But I would only need several hex keys combined with a pedal wrench, and I was good to go. That's where I got there. And I've never, knock on wood, I've never gotten burnt where my gear showed up broken.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little more cautious than a lot of people when I pack. So you've kind of alluded to this, but the derailleur to me is one of the biggest things people really should be thinking about. recognize that when you are traveling with your bike to the race and home, it's really different than when the race directors are moving your bikes, right?
Right.
So whenever I pack my bike for actual travel to or from a race, I will take the derailleur off the bike. Right. If you leave it on the bike, you are definitely increasing the chances that you will have a broken derailleur because your bike's
you're asking for trouble.
thrown around by TSA, you run into turbulence on the plane, whatever it might be. People throw these things onto conveyor belts, often on their sides. It doesn't take much, and you've broken your derailleur.
Right. Yeah.
The other thing I've seen happen a lot is people don't, like you said, padding is really important. What I actually do is I just have this big roll, or whenever I need to replace it, you just get like a big roll of like 2-inch thick soft foam, and I cut it into pieces. Yeah, I cut it into pieces and, just make sure I use that to pad anything that could come into contact with the sides of the box, right? Or the bottom of the box. But like rotors, I've seen rotors get broken because they're not padded against the side. I've seen, like the hubs, the bits of the hubs where the skewers go in, break through the sides. I saw a teammate once, they packed their bike with their chain ring down. And I think they had a pad of some sort in the bottom, but something shifted. Their chain ring broke through the bottom of the box. And when they unpacked it, they had sheared off all of the teeth off their chain ring.
So you put the bike in upside down.
I do. Yeah, absolutely. But, like I have seen successful builds where there's like a big foam block in the bottom.
That's what I do. I put the bike in. So I have a foam block on the bottom and I drop the bike just on top of the foam block.
Yeah, I do mine so it's resting on the bike seat and the like you do. I take my bars off. During the race, I don't take my bars off, but when I'm traveling, I do. But I'll even zip tie the chain up so the chain's not dangling and like
not
just
popping around. Yeah, because it's going to get knocked off the bike anyway. You have to put it back on and you get messy and sticky. Right. It's so funny. We raced with Sherry Hines, and Sherry, God love her. Sherry's not very big, so her bike could literally just drop right in. You could take off the two wheels and drop the bike directly into the box.
Yeah. No, and that's pretty much what I have to do too. Lucky on that.
But that's something to practice on this side of the ocean, though, everybody. Like, don't wait until the week of the race. Like, practice taking your bike apart, putting it inside the box, taking it back out. But it's amazing how quickly, when you're in a race, how quickly you assemble your bike.
Well, that depends. I've seen both.
I surprised myself how quickly I'm like, this is like by the third day of the race, it's like I'm like a ninja. It's incredible.
Yeah. No, I think that can be the case, but then there's that case where you realize like you've put something on completely wrong, and Well,
I also lost a skewer in Faro, but that's a whole other story. Yeah.
No, this is good stuff. I mean, a couple other quick thoughts, and then if you have anything else, then we'll move on. But make sure if you're flying with CO2 that you're not flying with CO2 because you're not supposed to.
Nope.
So make sure that's out of there. And the big thing there is usually it doesn't cause an issue if you forget, but it could become a problem with TSA and then you could miss your flight or something like that. So get that CO2 out of there. And also bike batteries, right? That's another one. You're supposed to fly with those. The current requirements are you should have those in your carry-on.
We always get stopped when we fly with the bike batteries. We take everything out. We absolutely get stopped going through security because we have our lights and our lamps and our batteries, and our carry-ons look like all these wires and everything. So that's just a fact. So one thing you really should do, granularly speaking, is give yourself a lot of time to get through security. We're slower through security. I'm trying to think, what was it that Jimmy was bringing something with him? Was it his paddles? He basically carried something through. Because you really can't carry hiking poles. Right. Hiking poles have to be checked. Put those hiking. Don't think you can carry hiking poles through security. But I think it was the paddle that Jimmy tried to carry through security, and they let him carry it through.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Any other, packing tips for those that are taking on long distance travel to get to their first expedition race? Yeah,
I think from a packing perspective too, I think the first thing you have to do is take over your kitchen table. It's a running joke in my house that I commandeer the kitchen table. There's something to be said for about like 7 to 10 days before I have to leave for the race. I begin to lay things out over the course of days, and I just add to that pile. Like it's like eating an elephant. It's one bite at a time, and you have to add so many things to that pile that you can't just pack in one afternoon. And so I put like the sleeping bag would go out, and I put the bike helmet out, and I put the bike shoes out, much to the horror of my wife, the bike shoes on the table. Like I would do all of that. And then I would slowly over time, it would build. And then I'd begin to check, and I'd have a checklist. I'd have the required list here, and I would go through the list and I'd begin to count things off. So for me, it was packing as a process, not as a single event.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, and I mean, whatever you can do to prepare ahead of time. So if you get that race schematic and you can pack food into small bags that are organized by stage or by hour count, whatever you prefer, if you can, pre-pack your clothes so that work is done, it's going to make such a big difference for you on the other side of whatever.
For my second ITARA race with Pete Spagnoli, Alyssa Godesky, and Jim Vernon, and for Faro, my race food was packed in individual bags by stage when I left my house. Yeah. So I had I had no food to pack when I was there. I mean, I sourced some food there, some real food, but all of the stuff that I would need from those, I was ready to go. Yeah.
Yeah, that should be a quick plug too, right? Like just to make sure folks that haven't done this before don't feel like you need to fly with all your food, right? Like most of us will do a grocery store run ahead of time. And even in places that are a little more exotic, like it can actually be kind of fun to go out and just buy whatever local flavor potato chips they have or such. Also be aware that depending on where you're going, costs may be quite different. So, if you're going to like the Faroe Islands, for example, you can expect to pay a premium for food compared to if you're going to, do whatever race. But
my famous food story is for the first ITARA. We tried to source a pizza because here's a pro food tip. You buy a pizza, 8 slices, say 10 slices, how many they cut it. You double wrap it in tin foil. It will last for days in bins. The pizza will sit. It won't go bad. It won't kill you. We didn't have access to a pizza parlor the morning of the race. So I walked down to the local McDonald's and I attempted to purchase 30 cheeseburgers through the automatic kiosk. By the way, you can purchase no more than 10 of them, just for those of you who are using those kiosks. Okay. So the manager had to come out, and I had to explain to the manager I needed to purchase 30 cheeseburgers. The irony of the American buying 30 McDonald's cheeseburgers in Scotland was not lost on me. But we wrapped them in tin foil, and they sat in the bins for 4 or 5 days, and they were fine. We ate them on the last day.
Last as long as the pizza, even though they're meat, but they do. Yep,
they do. Like so, McDonald's. Okay. Thanks, guys. The food works.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, a couple other quick thoughts. Air tags. Air tags have really become like a must
in everything.
A must, right? Like, so when you are packing your bike box, your bags, make sure you have an air tag in each one. It's not going to help if your gear gets lost and someone's going to lose their gear, but it makes it much less stressful.
Yes, and you can follow the adventure of the gear as it gets to your house. We did that when we both had that when they lost our gear. And we saw our bags. My bags got to New Jersey by way of Philadelphia.
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it was an incredible story.
Yeah, I mean, air tags absolutely are 100% required. They need to go in they tape them into everything, put them in, name them, and follow along. It is so nice. It's so nice to know your bags are under the plane. It's also not so nice to know your bags are still in the terminal. But on the way home, who cares? It's on the way there you're worried about it.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. The other one is a hand scale. Really recommend you can get these little hand scales, which are fantastic to help you at home. I mean, you might be able to work with a floor scale as well, but hand scales are great. You can also have them in the airport. So when they tell you your bag's too heavy, you can actually figure out relatively quickly what you need to take out. And then of course,
that's actually a good point there. I mean, if possible, when you go to the airport, go as a team as best as you can, because you may need to switch gear between bags to make weight.
Right. Yeah. And then when you're, pre-race at race site, when you're trying to figure out your bin weights and your bag weights, especially when you're combining your gear in a given, a solitary bin, those hand scales can really make all the difference. And I would just say as a race director, huge plug, like do the work yourself. Show up at bag weigh-in. If the race director is doing a bag and box weigh-in, show up with your bins and bags sorted. Like it really makes such a difference. It is like the racer's responsibility. So don't be the team that shows up with a bag that's 20 pounds overweight and then you act like you have no idea and then give the race director a hard time about the bag weight. Like it's all going to be communicated well ahead of time.
And this is and for me, that's a sign of respect for the race director. By the way, I think.
And more than the directors in a way, that it's about the race staff, right? Like the race staff that are out there working incredibly hard to make this happen. They're literally breaking themselves carrying around these bins and these boxes and these wet paddle bags that get much heavier than the weight limit as it is. So be respectful to them.
Racers looking for a classic Midwest adventure have something special to look forward to this year. For their 5th anniversary, John Harris and his Howling Adventurer team are expanding the Pocket Gopher Challenges, and this year's race includes 6, 12, and 48-hour divisions. If you've been thinking about doing an expedition race, but not sure you're ready, this is the race for you. The Pocket Gopher has it all, from awesome mountain biking to pack rafting with some amazing land navigation all throughout the course. If that's not enough, there will be at least one rope section with a couple of surprises along the way. As with every Pocket Gopher race, soloists are always welcome. The Pocket Gopher may look cute, but be prepared for an expedition race with a slightly shorter length.
All right. Well, I know we're heading toward the end of our time. I do want to hit on a couple final questions so we can do these kind of rapid fire. So first of all, going all the way back to Untamed New England, though maybe also with your first international race, you've already hit on one or two things, but what were some specific lessons you learned during the actual experience of racing, multi-day racing?
So I'm gonna go back to Untamed New England real quickly because I learned a big lesson in that first race, and I've over my time I've taken it easy on myself about this. It really bothered me for a while was that I think that we left the race course too soon. I think that we were having a great race. I think it was a hard race. We had a lot of rain, a lot of cold. We were tired. We were beat up. We'd gotten super lost. We were getting our full price, and we had finished that big trek of the Belknap Range, I believe, and we had that big trek and transitioned to the bike, and it was the bike to another trek back. I forget the exact order, but there was a point where we could leave the course and we could kind of pedal. We could cycle to the kayaks and do the final one in, and there was this whole section that we could have done. And in talking about it, and I think this was more on me than on Jimmy. I think that I talked myself into finishing the race sooner than I expected. We were still race finishers. We still did all the mandatories. We were not unranked, but I felt like we left the course a little bit early. I wish we'd stayed on there longer. We had a great experience. But I think that's one thing I learned was that when you're in an expedition race and you're 75% of the way through it and your brain's chirping at you to finish, to get in, to ignore that and stay on the course for as much as you want, because when you come off the course, you're going to miss not being on the course. And so I think for me, that was a big lesson that I learned. I think that I would definitely point to that.
That's great. And it's obviously a fine line. Sometimes you end up trying to bite off, you bite off too much, but I think that's right. And I think that, I've had this chat with some racers before at Endless Mountains as a race director of, recognizing those moments where morale might be low, people are exhausted, they're pretty wide-eyed, and they're like thinking about skipping something. And you're like, no, like just stop and think about it, maybe sleep for a little while, and look at it with fresh eyes.
Funny though, like our morale was high. We were like, this is great. We done like it was like declare victory and go home. Like our feeling was we could only screw up a great experience if we stay out here.
Yeah.
Like it was a weird thing. Like we were having a great time. It was just like, we could be done with this and be finished. And I don't know. I mean, it was my first race. I would make a totally different decision today.
Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah. Any other kind of immediate lessons that you remember from those first couple races that stuck with you?
Yeah, I think also too is I think there's I want to say it the right way. That when you're on the course and you've gone through the time and the toil and the trouble and the expense to get there, is to make a point, make sure that you're enjoying yourself during the race. Make certain that you're racing. We're not sweaty tourists, right? We're not on a bus tour. We're racing, but take the moment and take the opportunity to look up and around and be like, oh my God, I am on the highest peak in Scotland. Oh my God, I am in this region of Ecuador that I would never have been here before, or I'm in the Faroe Islands, or I'm sea kayaking here. I'm doing this. Like, I think that a big lesson for me was I can't get so wrapped up in the minute race that I'm in that I lose sight of the larger adventure that I'm in, and it's adventure racing. And so I think that's a good lesson for me, because I got trapped in the idea of being like, I have to be so in the moment at this second right now. It's like, well, wait a minute. This is a pretty beautiful place and you're never going to be back here again, most likely. So really do your best to enjoy it. Like that was a big lesson for me.
Yeah.
A more practical lesson that I would say is get really good at, I'm going to use the word survival, not the right word to use, but like get really good at setting your tent up like under like difficult conditions. Like you got to put your tent up like on the side of a hill, or you have to pull out your bivy bag. We've had times in races like we were in Faro. We had a really rough first day. We had a great race, but our first day was really rough. We ended up bivvying on the side of a mountain, like full on, like taking our bivy bags out and like laying down behind rocks to avoid the wind. Like I had practiced that in a non-emergency situation during an overnight hike at home. When the real deal came to come and do it, I was able to do it pretty easily, and it wasn't a shock to my system. I'm like, well, I guess I'm sleeping in the grass, in the mud on the side of this hill. And it was kind of raining, kind of not. I mean, that was pretty intense.
Yeah. Yeah, no, those are great pieces of advice. I would add also, kind of a variation of your or take stock of where you are and really appreciate the moment. Also, like appreciate that you're doing something really unique with several other people.
Yes.
Right. You're out there with a team. I think, this is a tough sport anyway. Multi-day racing is, about as tough as it gets in terms of, athletic ventures and competitions. And there's a lot of moments where even the best expedition racers are kind of in the hole physically and mentally and asking hard questions. And it can be really easy to get focused on yourself in those moments. And I think that's when some of the bad decisions actually happen is people decide, you know what, I've had enough. Like, I can't do this. I don't want to do this. But recognizing that when you sign up for these things, like you're joining a team, right? And it's a 3 or 4 person team, most likely, occasionally a pair. But your teammates are there with you, and your experience is theirs. And so really trying to savor those moments too, and recognize that you're part of a much bigger sum here.
I think, and to that point about getting along with your teammates really well is sleep strategy. Right, because when you're flying overseas, you're first off, you're breathing plane air for hours, right? So planes are dehydrating.
Yep.
There's time zone issues that you have to worry about. And then we had in Ecuador, so Ecuador was kind of easy from a time zone perspective. It's roughly, I think it's like 2 hours behind New York, right? So that wasn't a big deal. We get to Ecuador. We have 2 really nice nights in an Airbnb right in Quito, beautiful place, really good, and then we ended up going into Patate, and they got us this beautiful hacienda to stay in. It was great. The night before the race, so you had all of our preparation. We go to bed. Next door to our hacienda, they were having a funeral / wake for somebody, which rolled into a party, and so literally there was a full on party going on right next door to where we were trying to stay, and sleep was not happening. And so it was like you're trying to bed, you're trying to sleep. They're playing music there. You hear them over there. The mistake we made was that when we started that race, we should have counted our first race night as our second sleepless night. And that caught up with us. You really have to pay a lot of attention to your sleep pattern, your sleep schedule, because at home, you might think that your first night is just your first night of not sleeping. If you add in travel and noise and general unsettledness, you may be going into that race a lot more tired than you thought you were. And
that's right.
Also, adrenaline convinces you that you're not that tired. But when the adrenaline drains out, like in that race in Ecuador, we had a teammate. It was the second, it was day 2. And he's like, I gotta lay down. Like, I can't go on. And he wanted to leave the race. And we're like, no. We took like an hour nap in the mud, and he was fine.
Yeah.
But he completely misjudged like his sleep schedule.
Yeah, no, Mary Chandler, Andy Bacon, and I did a deep dive in my last episode with them, kind of our mailbag episode, and we talked a lot about sleep strategy. And you're absolutely right. That was something we all talked about as well. All right, what about myths? Give me a couple of myths, some things, again, kind of like lessons learned, but things that you feel like people perceive about expedition racing that you would contend are not quite accurate.
This might sound a little crazy, but it's not as hard as you think it's going to be.
Yeah.
It's hard. Don't get me wrong, but it's not impossible, right? So the biggest myth is that it shouldn't be if your barrier to races, you think that you don't have the physical capacity to do it. I absolutely assure you that you do. And if you could do it 24 or 36-hour race and enjoy that race, you could do an expedition race. So I think the myth is the idea that you're living in some sort of a rarefied air. Like not for nothing, Brent. Like I'm nothing but a racing schnook, right? I'm an average guy, 1,000%, and I go and do this stuff. If I can go and do it, anybody else can do it.
That was a variation. First thing on my list was training, right? You know, this idea that to do these races, you need to be somehow figure out how to train 15, 20, 25 hours a week. And the answer is no, right? You really don't. Now, if you're trying to go out and compete to be on a podium, you got to do more, right? You do. But there's a lot of other
let's not make that clear. Like if you want to win the race, well, then guess what? Like you're living in rarefied air. But if you want to go have a good, solid mid-pack experience, you'll be fine.
Yeah, you can do that on 6, 7, 8 quality hours of training a week, right?
And you have to do, and my recommendation is you do as many 24-hour races and as many 36-hour races as you can, and you build in as many race simulation training sessions as you can. Yeah, absolutely. What else? You have another one? Another myth I would argue here is I would say that it's really challenging to be in a foreign country. That the idea that going to Ecuador or Faro or Scotland is somehow like the cultural barriers are so insurmountable. You will find out that when you're racing, that the local population is 1,000% rooting for you. Like they love, and very often we race in places that don't see a lot of people like us. And so like when we pass through a town or we pass through a village, they are so pumped and so excited. And we're and of course we're gracious, we're friendly. We have an obligation too to live up to as visitors. We have to respect the local people. But I think the idea, the myth that somehow like these foreign countries are tilted against us in some way, like no way. Like you kidding me? Like those were the best experiences. And I've had zero problems in foreign countries with other people. Yeah. No, that's great. And I would add to that, we just talked about this a few minutes ago, but just to reiterate, the piece that the travel is such a huge barrier that you shouldn't do it. Absolutely not, right? Like, does it take a little more effort? Can it be a bit stressful? It can. But, like you said much earlier in the podcast, if you're just flexible and try to work on your mindset, stay positive, deal with the hurdles, that come up, whether it's a lost bike bag or whatever, more often than not, it's really not that big of a deal. And the payoff is really worth it. Exactly. Well, that's right. For all the trouble you go through to get there, what you get in response is incredible. Now, there is one thing that I don't know if I'm myth busting here, if I'm confirming a myth or I'm giving good advice here. I've always been very thoughtful that when traveling before the race, I don't really go deep on the local food because my system's not used to that, and I'm not going to pack myself full of great food beforehand just to get sick before the race. I save all of that for after the race. And so, what I mean by food is when I was in Ecuador, for example, I made it a point that and I ate a lot of Ecuadorian food when I was there. It was all really, really well cooked. And I avoided greens and salads. I avoided things that had dressings on them. Like to me, you give me a big fat steak that's cooked to a cinder. If I get sick because of that, something really strong survived. I avoided those kinds of things. And when the race was over, I really leaned deeper into the culture. And if possible, if you could do it, if you're going to race, this is the way I do it is I get there, I have a day or two before the race, I race, and I try to put a few days after to see the country. I backload my vacation time. I don't preload it because I'm too distracted mentally getting ready for the race. Try to enjoy the local culture after you're done racing. That's great. Yeah. Water too, of course. Be careful with that water. Be careful with the water. Part of the world you're traveling to. Everything out of a bottle. I have one more. I was thinking just about, I think for a lot of racers, there's this sense of full course or bust. Now, I hope, a lot of, if you're signing up for your first expedition or thinking about it, hopefully you have a sense of that this is maybe not the most realistic expectation. But, for a lot of racers, they do kind of very early on start thinking about full course. And, a recognition that expedition racing is really not designed for most teams to actually achieve the full course. There are a few exceptions, but most races aren't open long enough for everyone to actually have that as a realistic goal. But recognize that, there's still an amazing journey to have, that even if you can't visit every checkpoint, these are still going to be remarkable experiences and events to compete in. Yeah, I think
So
you're spot on there, right? I mean, you have to be realistic about your capacity, realistic about what you can do, right? And we'd all love to go full course, and I can tell you, it's so important to me that I can't remember where I have and where I haven't. Like I'd have to actually think about it. Like we didn't go full course in Untamed New England. We did an Ozark. No, in Ozark we didn't because we had that crazy first trek of like 60 miles or 40 miles in 60 hours. That crazy first trek. I don't know if I've ever gone. I want to think. Did we in Scott? I don't. Here's my point. I don't remember what I've done. What I remember is that I've got on the course and I've gone as hard as I could with my teammates for as long as we could. And if race directors have made route decisions for us, that's cool. That's fine.
Yep.
You know what I don't do, and this is going back to my lesson from Untamed New England is I don't short course myself. Like I let the race director give us that direction. And say, listen, and we had that in Faroe Island. We had that super long night. We were just out there for so long that first evening. They brought us forward with a boat. They put us on the course and skip these checkpoints. And doing that, and this is the important thing too, is don't look at short coursing as a failure. Because what it does for you, it gets you back into the meat of the race. But all of a sudden you get to a TA and there's 20 teams around you and you feel like you're back in the race. Don't get caught up on I would much rather be short course and be around people than stay full course and be like, 12 hours, go into a TA and be the last bike boxes there. Yeah. That's soul killer.
No, absolutely. And, pay attention to what the race director tells you, right? Like Endless Mountains, for example, we typically don't actually have short course cutoffs. Right. We leave it to teams to make good decisions about what they're capable of doing. And that means if you are, really kind of fixated on full course for the first half of the race, you might get yourself into quite a bit of trouble getting to the finish line and maybe not be able to at that point. Right. So you do also sometimes have to think about what the race director is telling you and what the format of the race actually allows. So.
Yeah, and also the race director will, worth his or her salt, will give you a tip. Like, for example, when we raced in Itera the second time, it was very clear that there was a bike section where like you were going due east, and there were two checkpoints that were like really far north and across top and down the other side. And the race director at the briefing was like, "Well, listen, if you're going to skip a checkpoint, these are the checkpoints to skip." Like check, and doing that got us further up the course. We would have spent hours up there. It was only two checkpoints, got us further up the course, and it works out well because then we ended up getting good weather. We ended up doing a big hike in the daylight rather than in the dark. So so don't get obsessed about staying on the. If you can go full course, God love you. But if you got to cut, don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And also too, here's the secret: no one really remembers.
That's right.
That's what I tell my teammates when they get worried about this, and they're all like, "Oh," I go, do me a favor. Who came in 12th last year at Itera? Yeah. Like who came in 18th? Like no one remembers this. Everyone remembers how much fun they had on the course, how well they worked with their teammates, and what a challenge it was. Those final standings are great. I will admit I've gone extra hard head to head with another American team. That's a different story. I would have beat the other American teams, but I don't know where I finished. I just don't. Right.
Well, Brian, you've been a great guest. Thank you for all of your words of wisdom. Do you have any final closing thoughts for the racer thinking about taking the leap into this crazy world of expedition racing?
Yeah, well, first things first. I mean, anybody who's out there and can hear my voice, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm pretty available. I'm more than happy to consult with somebody and give some advice and some guidance. Right, I do that. I also think too, and I'll say this, is that I'm on the tail end of a really, really, really crummy medical year, right? And I had a heart situation a year ago this week, as a matter of fact, a year ago next week, and I had a massive leg injury this year, and my ability to do any more expedition level races is significantly in question, right? And so, if you asked me a year ago today, where I was healthy, I'd be ticking off a variety of expedition level races that I had in my sights. Those may be off the table forever for me. And what I want to say to the listener is that if everything lines up for you to do it, right? If you could get the time and the capital and the teammates and you could do all of it, you absolutely have to do it, because eventually we will all have a last race. And we may not even realize when it is our last race. And so if you don't sit around and worry about it and wonder about it, absolutely go and do it, because you're not going to regret that.
Well, Thank you for your candor. And I think that, that's great advice to end on. I don't have, I certainly can't say it much better than that, but yeah, get your teammates together, get out there and do it. You won't regret it. It is the most unique thing I've ever done is certainly multi-day expedition racing. And I can't imagine anything being more unique than that. So, Brian, thank you for your time. Everybody, thanks for listening. I imagine if you're already listening, you're listening to The Dark Zone. But if not, make sure you subscribe to Brian's The Dark Zone, an adventure racing podcast. So many great interviews there. Brian, thank you. And I look forward to seeing you out in the woods.
Thank you, Brent. Good luck, everybody. Go get them.